Question 1. What drew you to be involved in this subject, and how has it impacted your own life?
You know, I don't really understand how I got involved with UFO research back in the mid-1960s. I used to read it for recreation. I used to, when I was an undergraduate, just for a diversion, and then I got interested in it the more I read in it. And then when I became a graduate student, I became quite enamored with it and continued to do research in it, and wound up writing my doctoral dissertation on the subject of the controversy over UFOs in the United States. And since that time, I've kind of stuck with it, but I never was really a great believer in the abduction phenomenon as a serious worldwide event. And until I met a guy named Bud Hopkins, and Bud Hopkins showed me what he was doing, introduced me to abductees, and got me interested in the subject itself. That was in 1982. After I'd already been working quite heavily in the UFOs for years beforehand. And then by 1986, I started doing hypnosis with abductees. And the rest is well, let's put it this way, it's been downhill ever since. I've now done about, I don't know, maybe 1,100, 1,200 hypnotic regressions with abductees, but I haven't worked with that large a population. I've worked with about 150 people, but a significant number of them I have worked with many times, and some for decades, so I can follow along what is happening with this phenomenon as we see change over time. And which is what a historian looks for, as I was now I'm retired, but I was, of course, professor of history at Temple University in Philadelphia. So that's how I got involved with it. And the question is, how has it affected my life? Well, this was not the best career move I could have ever made, I will say that. This is something that has nothing but downside to it for anybody and everybody involved with it. It's all downside. There's nothing good about it for abductees. There's nothing good about it to even talk about it. It did not help my career. It only hindered my career in the history department at Temple University. But you know, I was not naive. I understood the pitfalls of doing this, and there are many. And I also understood the problems of even researching this, let alone the humiliation and degradation involved with having to explain it to my faculty members. But but one does not get the opportunity to make a contribution in a field, in an issue of, let's just say, of extraordinary importance, at least potentially important. This is a phenomenon that is either an interesting and bizarre footnote to history and popular culture, or the most important thing that's ever happened. There's nothing in the middle. There is no middle ground in this. It's either happening or it's not. With UFOs, there is a middle ground. People are seeing things, and they are indeed seeing things. And UFOs are seen on radar and on the ground at the same time, and the police see it, and lawyers and attorneys see it, and the priest and the minister and the rabbi all see an object at the same time. It's on the ground. One throws a rock at it. It's the evidence for UFOs is huge, but yet people can be mistaken, etc., etc. But you've got photographs, tapes, you've got radar. With abductions, what you have is people's testimony. People are wrong for any number of 1,000 reasons, or should I say any one of 1,000 reasons, or any 10 of 1,000, or any 1,000 of 1,000 reasons. Memory is fallible. And it's retrieved through hypnosis, which is fallible, administered by people like me, amateurs, who are fallible. And consequently, the form of evidence for abductions is a lot of pegs lower than the form of evidence for the UFO phenomenon. So the problem is, how do you then make sense out of this type of anecdotal information retrieved through hypnosis from human memory? And the answer is, there are ways to do it. It's not just, I guess this is correct and I guess this isn't correct. There are controls to put into place. There is, in fact, a pathway to finding out what you think is as close to reality as possible within these narratives. And the interesting thing about it is that is their consistency. If you may allow me to ramble on and on like this, without consistency, you have nothing in the abduction phenomenon. If everybody tells a different story, it is automatically and absolutely internally generated through people's minds. It would therefore be based on their own, the society that they live in, how they grew up, how they conceive of the world, whether they have mental issues. There's a lot of reasons why this would not be real. But they are consistent, and they are consistent around the world, regardless of who the person is, or regardless of the upbringing, regardless of anything. And the consistency is not that they're just telling the general story of how they got kidnapped, but they're telling precise details that nobody could possibly know. Even now, a large percentage of the abduction phenomenon has not been made public, and people still tell me these details that are just astonishing, that says something profoundly important about the human mind if this is not happening. So what I can do is I can take these details and just put them together. They all match, and you begin to have a consistent storyline, a consistent discussion about what this phenomenon is and what it's up to.
Great. I mean, there's a lot of sceptical people out there, as we know, Dr. David Jacobs.
I think the word "a lot" might be a misnomer. It's enormous. This is the fringe of the fringe. This is as crazy as one can get. And this is you have to understand where this phenomenon lies, and especially in the UK, it's the antipathy towards it is really astonishingly high.
Yeah. People think I'm a lunatic when I talk to them about it, and I think that's why I love, I'm grateful to interview you, because I believe we need to shout from the rooftops with this, whether it's true or false. We need to let people know and open up people's minds. My wife has asked me to ask you. She's sceptical about all this. There's specialist people have said that these are just crazy dreams. These abductions are just crazy dreams. What would you say to that?
Well, the first thing I would say is they have absolutely no knowledge of what the abduction phenomenon is whatsoever, even by asking that. Professionals say this all the time. In fact, sleep paralysis is sort of the explanation du jour. I have collected about 35 different explanations for this phenomenon, all of which are mutually exclusive, incidentally, and none of which take into account the evidence for the phenomenon. The problem is this. People are physically missing from their normal environment when they are abducted. Police have been called, search parties have been sent out, children hunt for their parents, parents hunt for their children. They're not there. This is not a feature of this phenomenon where somebody is discovered at a pub or a bar or something like that, bending the old elbow, and then telling the family, well, I must have been abducted, I don't know where I was. That does not happen. That's not part of this phenomenon. Secondly, the majority of cases that I have looked at over the years happen when a person is not asleep. It happens during the daytime. It happens at night when they're watching the telly. It happens when they're driving. Third, it happens oftentimes to groups of people, that is to say families, or groups of people who are together at kids at a camp, for example. This is not unusual. And they can confirm each other's abductions. And sometimes they don't even know each other and will run into it. You'll meet each other at random. This happens, it's rare, but it does happen. And can point to each other and say, and remember, I saw you, that does happen. Sometimes people see other people being abducted and they're not abducted themselves. My colleague Bud Hopkins, the late Bud Hopkins, wrote a book about this called Witnessed, where all sorts of people saw this woman being taken out of her window, through her window and into a UFO. They thought they were seeing a Hollywood movie being made. All of that means that as experts in sleep paralysis talk about, that this could not possibly be sleep paralysis. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And yet, it's a commonly thought it's a common idea of what generates this phenomenon, but it's not true.
What about the people that say that there's time missing, that an hour missing, 2 hours missing?
Yes, well, that's what happens. People do have missing time sequences. In other words, if people were to say, I was abducted and I came back and it was just 2 minutes later or a minute and a half later, then to me, something would be very wrong. Because I'm not a scientist as a historian, but I am what I think is a rational person. And in order to be missing for 2 or 3 hours and only 2 minutes has gone on the clock, means that they had to travel at the speed of light during the entire abduction phenomenon for reasons that I could not possibly fathom. We don't have that. That's just not part of this phenomenon. When they're missing for 2 hours, they're missing for 2 hours, and when they describe what happened to them, it's 2 hours worth of events. In other words, it's a real-time phenomenon. This means that when people call them on their phones, they look at their phone later on, they realize I've missed all these calls. How could that possibly